What is going on, YouTube people, today? The National versus Sports Card Dealers with Fanatics Fest waiting in the wings. There's been a lot of chatter recently over the last week or two about, see these big social media posts. I lost my table for the National. I got kicked out of the National. This, that. Oh my goodness. What am I going to do? So, let's kind of talk about what's going on a little bit today. This has been a big topic online, and it has been a big topic locally to me because I know a few dealers that set up at the National. They travel to the various different ones, Chicago, AC, and they are local to me. And this has been something they have been discussing as well because I know some people that would set up with those dealers, and they are affected by this. So essentially, what's going on is the National Committee is under new ownership, and this is something they've been kind of threatening to crack down on for a while. But the gist of it is the way that I understand it, and this is not a very opaque process for how you get a national table, but essentially it's seniority based. So if you've had a table and you keep a table, you keep getting your table. Well, as the hobby exploded during the pandemic, that turned into a very, very, very expensive piece of real estate, a national table. Now, I don't know what they actually charge. If someone does, feel free to fire it away in the comments down below. I did see what Fanatics charges. More about that in a minute. So what would happen is the dealers, the old school dealers that, they've been setting up for years, they would either sell off some of their space, trade some of their space, or I even heard of instances of them selling their entire table. So basically they would just show up, get whatever they needed to pick up, hand it all off to somebody else, and then someone else would set up at their table. But they would be selling it for way more than what the National was charging for it. This basically eventually got under the National folks' skin, and they didn't like that. They didn't like that someone was basically flipping their tables. So there had been threats of cracking down. There had been threats of, if other people are behind the booth, we'll pull your pass. That was even going on last year. They made an example out of a couple people. Well, this year it seems to have ramped up even harder. Basically, the way that I understand it, and someone could correct me if I'm wrong, is essentially each standard table, that's not like a David Adams or something crazy, basically gets two names on a piece of paper. Those are the two names that are allowed behind the booth. They are being very, very restrictive with dealer badges this year, with basically all badges this year, to be quite honest with you. And that's essentially all that you get. So no more subletting of the tables. So when you see, and I reached out to some of these people that were complaining on social about, I lost my table at the National, I got booted out of the National, and everyone that I pinged, and I'm sure there are, because I've heard of a handful of people that legitimately own the table, lost their space. But 99% of the people that I talked to, it was, oh no, I didn't actually own the table. I was subletting from someone else, and they told me I can't set up anymore. So in a roundabout way, the National was booting them, but they really didn't actually own the space to begin with. Their name was not on the piece of paper. And this has caused a lot of chatter over the last week or so. And it feels like they went the nuclear option. I feel like there was some middle ground that they could have got into that would have kind of allowed a little bit of both. I could see not wanting someone to sell their entire table and basically not even show up and just pocket the money and say, cool, just because my name is higher on a list than yours, I get to charge you a few extra $1,000 and basically flip my space. That I could see them wanting, hey, no, you're not doing that. But I know locally what some people would do is they would set up, and a lot of these dealers work alone and, try to work a 5-day show, basically, even a 6-day show, depending on if you're setting up on Tuesday. But basically working a full week show, long hours, long days, essentially by yourself is near impossible. So what they would do is they would go to some people locally, and I think a lot of people did this, and basically say, hey, if you're willing to help work the table with me, I'll give you a showcase. So this wasn't even necessarily that money was changing hands here. It was more of, hey, if you're willing to put the work in, help me out, help set up, help, man the table so I can walk around or go get some lunch or just relax for a few minutes. The trade-off to that will be I'll give you a showcase and you can sell your stuff out of that one showcase at the table. And I know plenty of people that had this arrangement. Well, that has now been shut down. Now, the fear as an attendee, obviously the people that were set up like this were, I'm guessing, relying on this, thinking this was going to happen, and now got kind of screwed. Interesting dynamic on that in a minute. But this could, as a show attendee, this could affect the inventory in the room. Because now the old school dealers aren't sharing table space with some of the new people or getting a more broader mix of dealers, because you might have at one table, you might have 2 or 3 different dealers in, like last year at Chicago, which would give you a wider breadth of inventory. Maybe a non-sports guy set up that wouldn't normally be able to get a table on his own, but he could work in a showcase of all the Star Wars autographs or something like that. That might not exist now. So it could impact the inventory. I don't think you're going to walk through the show and see empty tables. I don't think it's going to be anything crazy like that, but I wonder if it is a lower level of inventory. Not saying that the inventory is not still going to be fantastic, but there's a reasonable possibility that it might not be as diverse, or you might not see the same levels of inventory that you have or been used to the past few years. So another angle to this, as up until this week, the National had been late last week, the National had been very quiet on how they were handling trade nights. So in the past, there was the Card Collector 2 / Kentucky Roadshow trade night that was usually on Thursday, and then there would be pop-up ones all over the area at all the local hotels. Well, at Chicago, Atlantic City, that was possible. At Cleveland, everyone is very, very spread out, and there is not really a natural place for this. And the hotels are smaller. They're just not designed to handle that level of crowds. So everyone was kind of like, what the hell's going on with trade nights? So the National announced theirs. I don't know if Card Collector 2 is involved or not. It does seem like that the ones that they're going to have are going to be big corporate sponsored and big events. They're almost going to be like an event after the show, which is fantastic. But because they were so late in announcing these, some people were getting worried, and they basically started a show after the show. This popped up on Instagram about a week or so ago. The after show at the Aviator. This is right around the corner from where the National is. It's a 150 table show and a trade space. So it is a card show plus a trade space. So it's a card show and a trade night mixed together. The interesting thing about this is, doing a little bit of poking around, a lot of the dealers setting up at this are people that had table space at the National that they were subletting from somebody else. So because the National kind of forced these people out, and this isn't all of them, but this is the case for some, they essentially started a show after the show, which is an interesting angle. So, in the National Trade Nights, I believe, go to 10 or 11 p.m. This goes to 1 a.m. So I'm shocked no one has done this before, where you basically have everybody in town already, and you're having your own card show essentially at the same time as the National. Now, it's not the same show hours. This is immediately after, but they're probably going to get a ton of traffic just because of everyone being in town. I am sure the National Committee is thrilled about this, knowing how they tend to get about stuff like this. There was, talk of them threatening hotels and stuff last year when people wanted to rent ballroom space to essentially, kind of, I'm going to say air quote, compete against anything that they were doing. They like to own the week, and it is their show, but you can't stop someone else from renting out space in the general area. So now, because they were late getting the trade nights up, because they have been removing some of these dealers, so these people were concerned about how they were going to sell their inventory, kind of like the old Jurassic Park quote, life finds a way. They found a way. So they essentially started their own show / trade night immediately after the national ends. The other twist to this is, and this is kind of an interesting debate in its own right, is you have Fanatics Fest a couple of weeks later in New York City. Now, Fanatics Fest, I did some digging on this, and to be a dealer there, you have to fill out an application. And they want what shows have you set up at. They want references. They want photos of your booth. They want your social media handles. If you have a YouTube page, if you have a storefront, do you have allocation? It is, I clicked through the form. It's multiple pages and they want a decent chunk of information. So you have to apply to be a dealer. I get the, and this is kind of one of those, it depends on the world that we're living in. In the past, the National needed to guarantee that room was full with dealers, like pre-COVID. So they needed to make sure that they had dedicated dealers willing to lay down on the line to get a table for that show because they needed to fill up the arena. In the past, that was probably more difficult to do. Now you got people killing each other trying to get table space at the National. Same with Fanatics Fest. So the National had to go with this, basically the seniority level system, and it served them well for a very long time until it didn't, which is now. Because part of the problem is a chunk of the room is just the super old school people with their old sports memorabilia, their old vintage dollar boxes, and all that stuff. And there's a place for some of that for sure, but a vast majority of the people attending the show that are paying to get in the door aren't going for that stuff. When you walk the show floor, that's the section of the show floor that has way less foot traffic. It's all the dealers in the front by the door, because those are the ones that have been there the longest. So they get to pick their booth space first. And you want to be by the door. You want to be by the main entrance. So you have all that kind of nonsense that you have to wade your way through until you get to, the more modern day show stuff. I'm not even talking about necessarily modern cards, but just, maybe high grade vintage, whatever it is that you're looking for, wax, whatever. Fanatics, because they're starting fresh, is taking the opposite approach. They're saying, hey man, you want in, you got to earn it. We want applications. You're not guaranteed to get in the next show. We need to see that you are putting in the work and that you are a good, high quality dealer, because they're basically trying to go the Top Gun approach. They want the best of the best. So it's interesting kind of seeing those two dichotomies play themselves out in real time with two shows that are basically going on back to back. Now, from an attendee side, the Fanatics method is great because you're going to get really strong dealers because it's an application-based process. If you want to go a little tinfoil side, that's Fanatics' way of kind of puppeteering things a little bit, because if you are a voice in the space, you are not going to risk losing your table space by speaking out against the machine or by being critical of them or super critical. Maybe you'll skirt the line a little bit, but you're not going to go to war over it because you're going to risk losing your table space. Now, the other thing that was on that application is the fee. To set up at Fanatics Fest is $3,000 for a 3-day show. It's Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So you're basically looking at $1,000 a day for, I think it was 6 showcases from what I remember space-wise, something around, basically 2 tables worth of space is a single booth, goes for $3,000. Now, I'd be curious, once again, if anyone knows what the National charges to set up for a booth, feel free to comment down below. I would love to know how those two compare against each other. But that's kind of where we currently sit. The National uses this seniority level method, and it seems like they are doing this crackdown to maybe clean up that list a little bit or get the people out that don't really want to be there. And this is probably something that they should have done a long time ago. But as I stated, I do feel like there would have been a healthy middle ground there. And then also, this is something that they talked about on Sports Card Nonsense, is if they are truly removing people's tables that were actually their name is on the table and they're losing their space, how is someone taking advantage of that? My guess is they're just going down the list. And I think that's ultimately the problem. You have set up this legacy style of getting a table, which means you don't have the best dealers. You just have the dealers that have been there the longest. Whereas Fanatics is taking the opposite approach and saying, we want the best of the best. Bring your A game or you're not getting in the door. As a walker of the show, I don't set up. I just want to walk around and look at cool cards and maybe make some transactions. I want the best of the best. So it'll be very interesting to compare and contrast these two shows come, mid-August, after I've been to both very close together. So, as always, curious for your thoughts and comments down below. We will catch you on the next one. Peace.